Okay, so if I ask you to build a mental profile of a historical figure,
Right.
someone who is a battlefield commander, a supreme legal scholar, a political agitator, and, a fierce critic of the patriarchy, you probably wouldn't start by looking at a woman in 7th century Arabia.
No, definitely not. And you certainly wouldn't expect that same person to be remembered, in popular culture at least, as simply a wife.
That is the massive paradox we are wrestling with today. We're looking at the file on Aisha bint Abi Bakr. And paradox is, it's really the only word for it.
It is.
Depending on which source in this stack you pick up, she was either the mother of the believers, a primary source of faith, or she's a catalyst for civil war, a figure of intense controversy.
It's a polarized legacy, to put it mildly. You have the Sunni tradition, which, reveres her as this titan of scholarship.
Okay.
Then you have the Shia tradition, which views her through the lens of political opposition to Ali. And then, just to make it more interesting, you have this fascinating layer of modern academic and feminist scholarship.
Right, folks like Keisha Ali and Joshua Little.
Exactly, who are trying to strip away centuries of, both praise and attacks to find the actual woman underneath.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to peel back those layers. We need to talk about her impact on Islamic law, which is staggering.
Wow, it's huge.
Her role in the First Civil War. And yes, we're going to tackle the controversies head on. The age question, the lost verses, the domestic rivalries.
It is a heavy file. But I think to really understand why she matters today, not just as history, but as a living legal force, you have to start with this claim you see repeated in the classical texts.
What's that?
The idea that Aisha represents a quarter of Sharia.
A quarter of the religious law. That sounds like hyperbole, right? Like a compliment that's gone a little too far.
It sounds like it, but it's statistically significant. We're talking about over 2,210 hadiths, sayings of the Prophet transmitted by her. That puts her in the top 4 narrators of all time. But here's the thing, if you just look at the number, you miss the point. The other top narrators, they were mostly collecting volume.
Okay.
Aisha was doing something qualitatively different.
She wasn't just a tape recorder.
Exactly. She was Islam's first content critic. You have to understand how hadith studies work to get why this is so cool.
Lay it out for us.
Usually the obsession is with the isnad, the chain of transmission. I heard from A, who heard from B, who heard from the Prophet. Men like Abu Huraira, a famous companion, were masters of the chain.
Right, so the verification is in the who. Who said it? Is he reliable? If the chain is strong, the text is accepted.
Precisely. But Aisha operated differently. She focused on the content of the text itself.
Oh.
She didn't care if the chain was perfect, if the content contradicted the Quran, or if it contradicted her understanding of the Prophet's character, his logic. She rejected it. She was effectively the first fact-checker.
There's a specific example in the research here that illustrates this perfectly. It involves a dog, a donkey, and a woman.
This is the classic clash. So Abu Huraira narrates a hadith saying that a prayer is nullified. It effectively doesn't count if a dog, a donkey, or a woman passes in front of the person praying.
Which, let's be honest, is grouping women in some less than flattering company.
Right, it's objectively degrading. Now, a traditionalist focus on the chain might just accept it and move on.
Well, not Aisha.
No, Aisha heard this and she was furious. She didn't just say, that's offensive, she dismantled it with empirical evidence. She said, you have likened us to dogs and donkeys. And then she countered it.
With what?
I saw the Prophet praying while I lay on the bed between him and the Qibla.
I love the logic there. She's saying, I was literally there. It's empirical observation trumping hearsay.
It's more than that. She's asserting that her lived experience in the private household holds more legal weight than the public observations of the male companions.
She's saying, you saw him in the mosque, I saw him at home. My data point is better.
Exactly. It sets a precedent that women's dignity isn't just a social nicety, it's a theological filter. If a ruling degrades that dignity, she treated it as suspect.
And she applied that independent reasoning, what you call ijtihad, to everything.
To everything. Take the issue of grooming. There was a prohibition on altering Allah's creation. Many men interpreted that as a ban on things like plucking eyebrows or facial hair.
Which seems like a standard literalist take. If God made you that way, don't change it.
Sure. But Aisha looked at the intent. She ruled that removing hair for hygiene or, beautification for one's husband was fine. She made a distinction between deception, which was the root of the ban, and maintenance.
That is a sophisticated legal nuance. She's carving out what you could almost call a proto-feminist jurisprudence.
I think you could. She's ensuring the law actually works for women, rather than just being applied to women by men who don't get the context.
Yeah.
She even had specific rulings on women's bathing, ghusl, that contradicted the men, essentially telling them, you don't have this anatomy, so stop making rules about it.
This authority? It's generally accepted in the Sunni tradition.
It is, but here's where the file gets darker. When she applies that same assertiveness to politics,
The reaction changes.
completely. We need to talk about the Battle of the Camel, 656 CE. This isn't a classroom debate anymore. No, this is the first fitna, the first civil war in Islam. This is the moment the community fractures, potentially forever.
So set the scene for us. The Prophet has been gone for decades. Uthman, the third caliph, has just been assassinated.
It is anarchy. It is total chaos. Uthman was killed by rebels from within the Muslim community. The demand for justice for qisas, or retribution, is deafening.
And Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Prophet's cousin, he becomes the fourth caliph.
He does, but he's in a bind. He can't immediately punish the rebels because they still hold significant power. They're embedded in his own support base.
And Aisha is not having it.
Not at all. She's in Mecca performing pilgrimage. She sees the lack of immediate justice as a moral failure, so she makes a decision that is, well, it's unprecedented for a woman in her society.
She rallies an army.
She doesn't just fund it or encourage it, she leads it.
The visual descriptions in the sources are intense. She's in a hadash, this armored palanquin, strapped to the back of a camel, commanding troops.
Right in the thick of the fighting.
It's very Joan of Arc, but what, 800 years earlier?
It is a defining image.
Yeah.
But you have to understand how divisive this is. To the Shia perspective, this is the original sin.
Why?
They view Ali as the divinely appointed imam. So to them, Aisha isn't just a political dissident. She is committing Bugat rebellion against God's chosen leader.
And they have a scriptural basis for this.
They point to the Quranic verse 33.33, which tells the prophet's wives to stay in your houses.
So in the Shia view, by leaving her house to lead an army, she's violating a direct commandment.
Precisely. They see it as a religious transgression that opened the door to Muslims killing Muslims. It's the moment the mother of the believers became, in their eyes, an enemy of the prophet's spiritual heir.
But the Sunni tradition, which
Yeah.
reveres her, has to reconcile this somehow. How do they square the mother of the believers fighting the rightly guided caliph?
The Sunni framework relies on ijtihad again, that independent reasoning.
Okay.
The argument is that her intentions were sincere. She wasn't trying to seize power for herself, she was demanding justice for Uthman. In this view, she made a mistaken judgment, but an honest one.
A well-intentioned error.
Yes, and the Sunni sources lean heavily into her regret. There are these poignant narrations where, in her later years, whenever she recited that verse, "Stay in your houses," she would weep until her veil was wet.
So it frames her as a tragic figure.
Right, who got swept up in the political vacuum.
So was it just politics?
Yeah.
The notes here suggest there was bad blood between her and Ali long before the war.
Oh, absolutely. It goes back to the incident of the slander years earlier. Aisha was accused of infidelity in a massive scandal.
Okay.
While the prophet was distressed, Ali reportedly told him, "Women are plenty. You can easily change one for another."
Wow. That is pragmatic, but incredibly cold.
It was a sting she likely never forgot. So when historians look at the Battle of the Camel, they see a mix of high-minded demands for justice and, well, very human, deep-seated personal resentment.
And the battle itself was a disaster for her side.
A catastrophe. Thousands died. Her camel was hamstrung and she was captured.
But Ali didn't execute her.
No, and this is a crucial pivot point. He treated her with immense deference. He sent her back to Medina with an extensive escort of women.
He maintained her status.
He had to. She was the widow of the prophet. Executing her would have destroyed the community. But the psychological break was done. This is where the Sunni-Shia split really solidifies.
So we have the scholar, the warrior. Now we have to address the elephant in the room. If you go online today and search for Aisha, the first thing you see isn't her legal rulings or her military command. It is her age.
You cannot avoid it. The classic Sunni collections, Bukhari and Muslim, state she was 6 at marriage and 9 at consummation.
Which, for a modern listener, is shocking. It is the primary attack line used by critics of Islam today.
It is, and historically, the defense has always been contextualism. The idea that in 7th century Arabia, childhood wasn't a number, it was biological. Puberty meant adulthood.
Right, and marriage was a tribal alliance, not a romance. That applying 21st century norms is anachronistic.
That's the argument, but that's not the only perspective anymore. The notes mention revisionist scholarship. This isn't just apologetics, this is people doing the math and finding discrepancies.
Okay, so this is where it gets interesting for history buffs.
Right. Scholars like Joshua Little, or Ruqayya Maqsood, argue that the age 9 hadith is likely statistically impossible if you cross-reference other data points found in the same sources.
To walk us through the math.
Okay, take your sister, Asma. We have solid dates for Asma's birth and death. We know Asma was 10 years older than Aisha.
Okay.
If you back calculate from Asma's timeline, Aisha would have been somewhere between 16 and 19 at the time of consummation.
That's a massive difference. I mean, that shifts the conversation entirely.
It does. Then there is the Battle of Uhud. We have reports of Aisha carrying water skins and tending the wounded on the battlefield. But we know for a fact that the Prophet strictly banned minors, anyone under 15, from the battlefield. If she was there performing those duties, she couldn't have been a child.
So if the math points to late teens, why does the age 9 hadith even exist? Is it a typo that got canonized?
It might be. The chain for that specific hadith funnels heavily through a narrator named Hisham ibn Urwa. He was based in Medina but moved to Iraq in his old age. Critics point out that his memory suffered from Itarib confusion later in life. The theory is that this number was a senile error that got recorded and then repeated until it became fact.
There's also a political angle, right? The idea that her partisans wanted her to be young.
Yes. Remember, Aisha was the only virgin wife of the Prophet. In the sectarian rivalry, emphasizing her extreme youth was a way to highlight her purity, her unique status.
It was a badge of honor then that backfired in the modern era. Speaking of things that get reconstructed or lost, we have to talk about the goat.
The goat, or the tame sheep. This is one of the strangest stories in the textual tradition.
This is the narration claiming there were Quranic verses written on paper under Aisha's bed.
Right, specifically about stoning and adult breastfeeding.
And that a domestic animal ate the paper while the family was distracted by the Prophet's death.
It's the dog ate my homework, but for scripture.
It sounds absurd, but the theological implications are huge.
They're massive. For Sunnis, this falls under a category called abrogation of recitation. The idea is that God intended for the text to be removed from the Quran, and the goat was just the instrument of that divine will.
So the ruling, like stoning for adultery, remains, but the verse is gone.
That's the view. But for skeptics or Shia polemicists, this is a goldmine.
Absolute cold 9.
They use it to question the preservation of the Quran. How can you say it's perfect if a goat ate a page, and they use it to attack Aisha's competence?
Right. You trusted the religion to someone who couldn't even guard a piece of paper.
And the content of that lost verse adult breastfeeding is a whole other controversy.
Rada al-Kabir. This is arguably Aisha's most controversial legal ruling. She stood completely alone on this.
Completely alone.
Explain the logic, because adult breastfeeding sounds wildly inappropriate to modern ears.
It wasn't physical breastfeeding, it was symbolic. In that society, segregation between sexes was strict.
Right.
But what if you had an adopted son or a servant who grew up in the house? Once he hits puberty, he is technically a stranger. He can't see the women anymore.
Which creates a logistical nightmare for the household.
Exactly. So Aisha ruled that a woman could give a specific amount of milk, symbolically to the man, establishing milk kinship. This would make him a mahram, a relative, and allow him to enter the house.
So it was a legal loophole.
It was a functional solution to a social problem, but the other wives of the Prophet were horrified.
They wouldn't do it.
No, they refused. They saw it as a specific exception for one person's, not a general rule, but it shows Aisha's character. She was willing to hold a legal position that literally everyone else in her community rejected.
Because she believed her logic was sound.
Yeah, it circles back to her independence. Whether it's the battlefield or the courtroom, she isn't looking for consensus. She's looking for what she believes is the truth.
No. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the human being.
Right.
Because for all this talk of the Titan and the warrior, the sources are surprisingly open about her flaws, specifically her jealousy.
She was the favorite, but she was insecure. Deeply. There's this heartbreaking admission where she says, I was never jealous of any woman as I was of Khadija.
Khadija, the first wife, who was already dead before Aisha even married the Prophet.
That's the thing. She was fighting a ghost. The Prophet loved Khadija immensely. He talked about her constantly. He honored her friends. Aisha, being young and wanting to be the center of his world, just couldn't compete with the memory.
It makes her incredibly relatable. And then there's the honey incident. This reads like a palace intrigue plot.
It is straight up conspiracy. The Prophet was spending too much time at the house of another wife, Zainab, because she had this special honey he liked.
So Aisha and Hafsa, another wife, decided to put a stop to it.
The plan was simple: gaslight him. They agreed that whoever he visited next would tell him, you smell like magafir. Magafir is this foul-smelling gum. They knew the Prophet was fastidious about his hygiene. He was terrified of smelling bad.
And it worked.
Like a charm, he swore off the honey. But then the plot was exposed via revelation in Surah At-Tarim, and they were reprimanded by God.
It's funny, but it's also striking that this story's in the Quran. You would think religious texts would want to paint the prophetic household as a place of constant serenity.
I think that's why she preserved these stories. She narrated them herself. She didn't hide the fact that she conspired or that she was jealous.
So you wanted people to know it was real.
Yes, it wasn't a sterile museum. It was a home with love, rivalry, mistakes, and forgiveness. She valued truth over image.
So when we zoom out and look at this entire file, the scholar, the warrior, the jealous wife, the politician, how do we synthesize this legacy?
It really depends on where you stand. To the Sunni world, she is the backbone of the faith. Without her, you lose the details of the Prophet's private life, his prayers, his character.
And the Shia world.
She is a tragic symbol of the wrong turn taken after the Prophet.
And the modern observer.
To modernists, she is a precedent that shatters the stereotype of the silent Muslim woman. She proves that in the earliest, most formative period of Islam, a woman could be the supreme authority, she could correct men, she could lead men, she could shape the law.
It brings us back to that quarter Sharia concept. Whether you view her as a hero or a villain, you literally cannot navigate the religion without going through her.
You can't. If you remove Aisha from the history books, the legal landscape of Islam collapses. The nuances of prayer, the laws of privacy, the details of the Prophet's life, they just vanish.
Which leaves us with a provocative what if to end on. We know history is written by the victors, but in this case, a massive chunk of the religious history was written by a woman who, politically speaking, lost her biggest battle.
That is the irony. She lost the war, but she won the library.
So here's the question for you. If Aisha had stayed in her house, if she hadn't marched to Basra, if she hadn't challenged the political order, would the Sunni-Shia split be as deep as it is today? And conversely, without her fierce content criticism, her willingness to call out men like Abu Hurairah when they got it wrong, would Islamic law today look completely different, especially regarding women?
It's a huge question. Without her check and balance, the patriarchy of the 7th century might have gone completely unchallenged in the religious texts. We might be looking at a very different religion.
A quarter of the Sharia, indeed. Thanks for unpacking this with us.
A pleasure.
See you on the next deep dive.